In Los Angeles, there is a line every officer understands. When La M targets someone, that person rarely makes it to the next day. Montebello once proved that point. Only a few seconds after an internal call, 3 men went down, and 2 of them had never even met the person who wanted them gone. It was not a legend. It was how the Mexican Mafia operated, fast and cold, with no hesitation. In this video, we walk through 5 names that even the strongest street groups avoided. These were people who could turn a suspicion into a death sentence, and a quiet block into a no-go zone in a matter of minutes. If you think you already know how dangerous the Mexican Mafia was, these 5 names might change that view entirely. Number 5. Jose "Joker" Gonzalez. On a noon in May of 1992, near a small house at the entrance of the Ramona Gardens housing project, a woman loaded her bags into a car. She was preparing to drive to Utah for her mother's funeral. Her name was Ana Lizarraga. She was 49. The neighborhood called her the Gang Lady. She was a former gang member and a mentor who worked to pull young people away from the violence that shaped their lives. She did not know someone had watched her since morning, and when 2 men in black clothing and hoods stepped into the driveway, no one understood what was about to happen. Within seconds, the street fell silent. The attacker moved in at close range and said nothing. A burst of gunfire followed, then another burst. When it stopped, Lizarraga was on the ground beside the car she was about to drive. But the moment that defined the case was tied to the person fleeing the scene. That person was Jose "Joker" Gonzalez from the group called Big Hazard. According to court records, he was described as an enforcer who carried out violent orders for the Mexican Mafia. Joker grew up inside Ramona Gardens, a crowded cluster of buildings covered in graffiti and unspoken rules. Big Hazard was home. The Mexican Mafia was the sky above every street crew. Gonzalez had a serious record from the early 1980s, including a shotgun incident that prosecutors said left several people injured. After years in prison, he had been released from Folsom for less than 1 month. Instead of staying quiet, he stepped into a mission linked to La M. Investigators later called it a broad daylight execution in the center of East LA. Federal court documents stated that Joker acted on orders from David "Smilon" Gallardo, a powerful emissary of the Mexican Mafia. Gallardo oversaw drug sales and collected taxes inside Ramona Gardens. Lizarraga was viewed as a threat to those interests. She tried to reduce drug activity in the neighborhood, and Gallardo suspected she worked with law enforcement. In places like Ramona Gardens, one accusation could change a person's future. That morning, the plan was simple. 2 masked men would walk up and approach the target at a distance that gave her no time to react. This was not random street violence. It was a removal of someone marked in advance, a method seen in several cleanup orders issued by the Mexican Mafia during that era. Many investigators said the attack carried the signature of a silencing mission, meant to send a message to the community. But Joker did not expect one thing. At the exact moment he opened fire, an LAPD officer named Thomas Lira was driving by. He saw the entire event and watched the 2 men in black fire at a woman who had no chance to protect herself. As the suspects ran, one of them turned and fired at the patrol car. Lira ducked, avoided the shot, and called for backup. Within minutes, the area was locked down. Jose "Joker" Gonzalez was detained a few blocks from the scene. In court, Joker had little room to deny the charges. The eyewitness account, the ballistic evidence, and the context lined up. The jury returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder with an element linked to ambush. The judge issued a life sentence without parole, plus 10 years for using a firearm and violating parole conditions. But the sentence did not end his story. It marked his shift from a street-level enforcer to a figure with influence inside La M, behind prison walls. In later investigations, Joker's name appeared beside some of the most influential members of the group. At one point, he was described as someone who helped review decisions connected to sponsorship or recommendations for new members, a privilege reserved for those with real status. Inside the Los Angeles County jail system, when Michael "Mosca" Torres managed drug taxes and controlled the kitty that brought in tens of thousands of dollars each week, a portion of those proceeds went directly to Joker. It showed he was no longer just carrying out orders. He was benefiting from the financial structure of La M. From a young hazard member raised among faded buildings, to an enforcer for the Mexican Mafia, to a figure with weight inside the prison hierarchy. Joker's path was not a story of glory. It showed how La M consumed a person. It demanded loyalty and offered dark power inside those high walls. But for the community that lost Ana Lizarraga, a woman who tried to keep kids away from the life Joker embraced, the 1992 killing remained a wound that never healed. It was a reminder that standing between right and wrong could cost someone their life. And Jose Joker Gonzalez carried out that mission, not because of personal anger, but because of an order from the Mexican Mafia. It was an order cold enough to change an entire neighborhood. Number 4. Manuel Jackson. Inside a high-security federal prison, where every step echoed on concrete and every stare carried weight, one inmate was pulled into a shadowed corner and almost did not make it back. People said he had made a few sarcastic remarks about the Aryan Brotherhood. Minutes later, he was on the ground with severe injuries. The name tied to that assault was Manuel Jackson, a figure believed to be connected to the Mexican Mafia with roots in Big Hazard. Before his name appeared in cases involving prison violence and RICO charges, Jackson already carried a serious criminal history. He did not start with minor theft. A federal court sentenced him to 210 months for armed bank robbery. He was labeled a professional offender because of a prior conviction for attempted first-degree burglary. In other words, Cricket was not someone who simply drifted into trouble. He had spent years in the criminal world before La M entered the story. The attack linked to comments about the AB became a turning point. Group assaults in prison were not rare, but being beaten and stabbed close to death over an insult to another gang, in what was believed to be a move to maintain respect between the Mexican Mafia and the Aryan Brotherhood, was a different matter. It showed a cold logic. A few words on the yard could be enough to remove someone from the board, and the person delivering the attack was acting for an organization that wanted its message heard. Jackson was later moved to one of the most restrictive facilities in the country, the federal supermax in Colorado, known as ADX Florence. For many inmates, it was the end of the road, sealed behind concrete and steel. But for a few people, it became a command room. Through letters and discreet channels, Cricket began showing up in investigative files with a new role. He was not only a participant in violence anymore, he was issuing instructions. When officers interrupted a failed drug deal on the I-10 freeway, they found more than narcotics and firearms. Inside the car of a hazard member, they discovered letters from ADX Florence signed by Manuel Jackson and Adolfo Champ Reynoso, a longtime leader of La M. Those pages helped investigators form a broader picture. Even under the highest security, Cricket was overseeing big hazard activity on the streets, including drug sales and discipline inside the Ramona Gardens community. Federal filings describe Jackson as someone who supervised hazard operations and used his Mexican Mafia status to widen the group's reach. In Boyle Heights, hazard was no longer limited to Ramona Gardens. With backing from La M, younger members brought product into other neighborhoods and were still considered to be working for the organization as long as they paid the required tax. Anyone who refused, whether they were locals, rivals, or people labeled as outsiders, could become a target for retaliation. Inside the housing project, this was not theory. Several attacks were documented. People were stopped, asked which group they claimed, and stabbed after giving the wrong answer. Under the influence of La M, Big Hazard turned a struggling neighborhood into a place where fear became a daily tool of control. Manuel Jackson appeared in reports as a link between these assaults, the drug revenue, and senior Mexican Mafia figures behind bars. At a higher level, Jackson became involved in plans that were far more ambitious. One indictment described an alliance between the Mexican Mafia and the cartel La Familia Michoacana. The agreement allowed La Familia to bring hundreds of pounds of meth into Southern California. La M, through people like Jackson and the Hazard Network, managed distribution and profits. This was not about small amounts hidden in shoes or a few pills sold on a corner. It was a large-scale supply system. On January 31, 2012, one transaction was brought to light. Jackson received a package of about 2 pounds of meth from a supplier after discussions about quantity and quality. He told an associate that he had received the shipment and had no complaints. Similar packages before and after that date, from the same source, later tested positive as real meth. The jury quickly concluded that Jackson was not simply observing. He was part of a distribution chain. When he appealed, the court upheld the verdict. From the outside, his path could be written as a short list: theft, bank robbery, prison violence, narcotics, RICO. But when the pieces fit together, it becomes clear why he was grouped with some of the most dangerous figures in the Mexican Mafia. He was the type of person the organization depended on. Someone willing to nearly kill another inmate over a remark. Someone sharp enough to use a supermax cell as a control point. Someone ambitious enough to connect cartel suppliers with a poor housing project. For residents of Ramona Gardens, his name might appear only in scattered news reports, but the impact was real. Their neighborhood became a transit point. Children grew up around gang lines, gunfire, and orders issued by people they would never meet. And inside a cell in Colorado, Cricket continued pulling strings no one could see. He did not need to shout to be heard across the yard. A few people only needed to read his instructions and handle the rest. Manuel "Cricket" Jackson was that kind of figure. Number 3. Frank "Puppet" Martinez. One evening in 1994, near MacArthur Park in Los Angeles, an old sedan pulled up to the curb. Two figures stepped out from behind an apartment building. There was no argument and no warning, only a few seconds of silence. Then gunfire tore through a street already familiar with violence. When it stopped, Carlos "Truco" Lopez from Colombia Lil Psychos was slumped over the wheel. But what shocked the community was the woman beside him. Donatella Contreras had no connection to the operation. She lost her life only because she sat in the wrong car with the intended target. The two shooters that night, Juan "Termite" Romero and Anthony "Coco" Zaragoza, were not acting on impulse. Federal files showed that both men gave the same explanation. They were carrying out an order. That order came from deep inside a high-security prison. It was sent by Francisco "Puppet" Martinez, a powerful member of the Mexican Mafia and the figure behind one of the most profitable branches of 18th Street. Puppet's story did not begin with the image of a leader. He grew up in Westlake, where 18th Street was almost part of the air. By the late 1980s, Martinez had risen to lead the clique called Colombia Lil Psychos. They controlled the corners around MacArthur Park, where crack, heroin, and weekly tax payments moved through their hands every day. When the Mexican Mafia expanded its authority over Latino gangs, Puppet did not just comply. He became one of La M's representatives in the area. Under Martinez, CLCS operated like a full-scale criminal business instead of a street crew. Weekly tax money reached about $85,000. Puppet alone received around $40,000 each month, even while he was locked inside Pelican Bay. The group bought real estate, restaurants, parking lots, and suburban homes. These places looked harmless. In reality, they were funded by drug revenue from MacArthur Park. The killing of Truco was only one of Puppet's orders, but it exposed something important. Martinez's power did not depend on holding a gun. It came from issuing commands across hundreds of miles. Romero and Zaragoza did not question the instruction. No one in the clique questioned it. In MacArthur Park at that time, when Puppet wanted a person removed, that person disappeared. But loyalty like that never lasts forever. A few years after the Truco killing, the FBI opened an investigation into CLCS Situast and seized more than $440,000 in cash from the home of one of Martinez's relatives. The unity inside the group fractured. Garcia, Puppet's wife, and Zaragoza began to suspect Juan "Termite" Romero of cooperating with authorities. Romero panicked and wrote a letter blaming Martinez. He said that if Puppet no longer trusted them, then they no longer trusted him. It was the worst mistake he could have made. From prison, Puppet sent out a letter with one short line that federal prosecutors described as chilling. Fumigate the termite. Fumigate, as in wiping out an infestation. In the language of the Mexican Mafia, it meant one thing: remove him. Not long after, Romero was shot multiple times near a CLCS parking lot. He survived, and that survival destroyed the entire operation. He became a witness and revealed the tax structure, the violent orders, and the way money moved from MacArthur Park to Pelican Bay. The twist was that even as Martinez faced RICO charges, dozens of counts, and witnesses turning on him, his name kept appearing in unexpected places. After being moved to the federal system, even inside a special housing unit, he continued sending instructions outside. This time, the messages were carried by his own attorney, Isaac Guillen. Guillen was later convicted for money laundering and transmitting Martinez's directives to CLCS shot callers. Prosecutors described Puppet as a shadow boss who ran MacArthur Park from behind some of the strongest walls in the country. Businesses that looked harmless, like restaurants, car washes, and suburban homes, were places where Puppet sent money, hid money, and collected tax revenue. Even other members of La M were wary of him. A wiretap recording from 1994 captured several carnal in a meeting discussing whether Puppet should be removed. The reason was simple. Martinez was too strong, too independent, and suspected of political maneuvering. In an organization where power always lived beside a blade, becoming a target did not mean a person was weak. It meant they were too strong. Everything came crashing down when the RICO trial began. Based on testimony, letters, recordings, financial records, and violent incidents, the jury found Martinez guilty of 12 major counts. He was sentenced to life plus 60 years. He was not placed in an ordinary prison. He was transferred to ADX Florence, where some of the most dangerous people in the country live in cells touched by only a sliver of light. But Puppet's story did not end when the Supermax door closed. CLCS no longer dominated MacArthur Park the way it did in the 1990s, but Martinez's shadow reached into the neighborhood for years. A 2007 shooting that took the life of an infant was described by the press as a leftover from Puppet's empire. It showed how his structure survived long after he was gone. Francisco Puppet Martinez was not the most aggressive member of La M. He was not the person with the highest body count. His danger came from something else. He knew how to build a money machine, and he knew how to end lives with a pen. A letter from Pelican Bay, a directive from ADX, a vague line like "fumigate the termite," and a neighborhood changed. Puppet did not need to stand in the middle of MacArthur Park to hold power. He only needed to sit behind steel bars and let others handle the rest. Number 2. Jesse Chino Conui. On the night of February 25, 2013. Inside the C1 unit at USP Canaan, a security camera captured a moment that unsettled the entire federal prison system for years. Senior Officer Eric Williams walked up a metal staircase with a clipboard, checking cells the same way he did every shift. At the top of the stairs, a figure stood still with both hands gripping 2 improvised weapons. In a brief instant, that figure rushed forward as if he had waited for that exact moment. Eric fell down the steps, and the unit felt cut off from the outside world. More than 100 inmates saw what happened, yet no one intervened. No one dared. The attacker, Jesse Chino Conui, was a person both Arizona and federal officials described the same way. Never underestimate him. Conui's story did not begin in a Pennsylvania prison. It began nearly 2 decades earlier in a rundown laundromat in Phoenix. That was the place where he carried out what many described as his entrance act into the new Mexican Mafia, an organization that demanded blood as the price of being accepted. Carlos Garcia, the victim, was not just another member. He had been a friend and a partner in the same operations, but he had become unnecessary. According to the organization, Garcia wanted to walk away, stopped contributing, and was no longer trusted. In the world of the new Mexican Mafia, that was considered a fatal decision. On August 25, 2002, Conui brought Garcia to the laundromat under the idea of discussing business. When Garcia stepped inside, 2 gunmen opened fire from behind. He ran outside in panic, but Conui followed, calm and focused, as if carrying out a task written long before. Garcia collapsed, and for the new Mexican Mafia, Conui had officially proven himself. That day, he did not only take a life, he ended the last part of who he had been before. From that moment on, Jesse Conui was no longer a troublemaker. He became someone willing to do anything to climb inside the organization. In the years that followed, he joined a drug operation that moved multiple kilos of cocaine. He collected money and handled distribution. Conui quickly became a trusted soldier. He did not complain. He did not talk out of turn. And he followed orders without hesitation. Violence was not only a tool, it was the language he used to survive. Inside prison, he attacked other inmates more than once, and he even targeted an outside investigator. Internal reports described him as someone ready for violence at any moment, and that description remained accurate until the very end. When Arizona convicted Conui of homicide and moved him into the federal system, officials believed stacked sentences would break him. But people like Conui do not break. They become quiet. He stayed silent for years, moved through several facilities, and was eventually sent to USP Canaan to serve his federal term. No one realized that his silence was only the pause before the explosion. The opportunity came in early 2013. The day before the attack, Officer Williams worked his shift as usual. During a surprise check, he ordered a search of Conui's cell. For most inmates, it was routine. But for Conui, whose world revolved around respect measured through tone and gestures and presence, it felt like an insult. Several sources said Conui remained furious the entire day. He did not argue. He showed nothing. But his stare was unforgettable. One inmate later said Conui only muttered 3 words. He disrespected me. For someone like Conui, that was enough. He did not issue threats. He did not raise his voice. He simply made a decision and waited. The moment came the next evening. When Williams walked up the stairs, Conui stood there without covering his face and without attempting to hide. He kicked the officer down and launched an extended assault. No inmate stepped forward. Everyone understood that this was not an emotional outburst. It was the act of a new Mexican Mafia member who had once taken a life to enter the group, who had enforced discipline for years, and who now responded to a perceived insult with deadly resolve. The trial began 4 years later. Conui did not deny what he did. His attorney did not deny it either. They asked the jury not to impose a death sentence. Officer Williams's family was devastated, and Pennsylvania's corrections system was outraged. 11 of 12 jurors voted for death, but federal law required a unanimous decision. Conui avoided the harshest penalty. He was transferred to ADX Florence, where some of the most dangerous people in the country live behind concrete walls that allow only a thin line of light. But perhaps the most unsettling part of Conui was not how he carried out violence. It was why. He acted over a brief feeling, a few words, or a cell search that he viewed as disrespect. That made Conui the type of person even in the prison world, where violence was routine, considered unpredictable. Jesse Chino Conui did not need the influence of a Mexican Mafia boss to be dangerous. He was dangerous in another way. If something did not sit right with him, he could turn any place, from a Phoenix laundromat to a staircase at USP Canaan, into the end of someone's path. Number 1. Mariano Chewy Martinez. On an afternoon in November 1998, inside a small auto shop in Montebello, the metal door was half open, and the smell of paint still hung in the air. 3 men were talking beside a car with its engine removed when neighbors heard the metal door shake, followed by a series of sharp, chilling sounds. When officers arrived, they found something no one could understand. 3 men were inside the shop, all deceased. None of them had time to run. None of them had time to say a word. And what made the scene even darker was this. 2 of the 3 men had no link to gangs or narcotics. They were simply in the wrong place. The Montebello killings became one of the bleakest moments in the history of the Mexican Mafia in Los Angeles. But the person behind it was not the shooter. He was near the top of the La M structure, miles away from the scene, and he only had to speak one instruction over a radio for an entire neighborhood to shift. That person was Mariano Chewy Martinez. To understand why a small auto shop became the site of an execution, we have to go back several years, to a time when La M was caught in a quiet civil war. On one side was the faction of Benjamin Topo Peters, a godfather figure who controlled several shot callers inside the prison system. On the other side stood someone just as dangerous, John Stranger Turskak. He was both a member of La M and a confidential FBI informant, and he was building his own faction. 2 power centers, 1 city, and a drug market worth tens of millions. They could not coexist. Caught between the two forces, Chewy Martinez was the figure everyone watched. He did not need to show himself on the street or fire a weapon. In La M, the most dangerous people were often the quietest. Martinez had almost no record of stabbings or shootings the way others did. Instead, he had something far more powerful: influence. Chewy controlled the Estrada Court section of Boyle Heights, one of the areas with the highest concentration of Sureños in Los Angeles. From 1993 to 1997, La M imposed what they called a street peace. Young members were told to avoid reckless shootings, reduce drive-bys, and report conflicts for approval. On paper, it looked like an effort to reduce violence. In reality, it kept hospitals quiet, lowered police attention, and kept drug money flowing. Martinez sat at the center of that system. Turskak moved in the opposite direction. He gathered followers from multiple cliques and pushed an opposing faction. Several sources said he began planning Martinez's removal. Chewy was once ambushed and struck in the arm while walking with his fiancée. Turskak did not know the FBI was observing him and documenting each move. But to Martinez, that attack was not a warning. It was a declaration of war. In April 1998, on Easter, one of his associates, Max Mono Torvisco, later testified that Chewy gathered 7 men, handed out radios, and drove them to Turskak's mother's home in Atwater Village. When Stranger walked out holding his young child, the group prepared to fire. One gun jammed, the other fired wildly. Stranger escaped into the house. No one was hit. But years later, prosecutors played a voicemail from Martinez. His voice carried a soft laugh and a few mocking lines about an Easter gift. The attempt failed, but the message was clear. Then Montebello happened. The main target, Richard Serrano, was believed to support Stranger. The other 2 victims, Jose Gutierrez and Enrique Delgadillo, were simply there at the wrong moment. Testimony stated that Martinez issued an instruction over the radio. "No one leaves alive." A group of associates carried out the order inside the shop. This was not spontaneous street violence. It was a cleanup mission in a civil conflict, where everyone understood that leaving one witness meant risking the entire structure. Martinez was arrested during a major RICO sweep in 1999. Nearly 40 people were indicted. Hundreds of recordings were introduced in court, covering drug taxation, greenlight orders, and power struggles with Turskak. Some calls were described by the FBI as lessons in authority. Chewy spoke like a chief executive, cold, direct, never naming people, only using codes and directives. During the 2001 trial, federal prosecutors sought the death penalty. It was the first federal death request in Los Angeles in almost 50 years. The jury convicted him on 24 of 25 counts. The innocent victims in Montebello became the emotional center of the case. The jury split 7-5 in favor of death, but without unanimous agreement, federal law required a life sentence instead. Even then, Martinez did not deny his role. His attorney focused on one argument. Torvisco, the key witness, had negotiated to avoid a death sentence, so his statements were questionable. Prosecutors responded with a single line. Torvisco did not create the Mexican Mafia. Mr. Martinez could have. After sentencing, Chewy entered the federal system with life without parole, plus more than 130 years. From then on, he disappeared from public view, mentioned only in research on La M. Some internal sources claimed he died in custody from illness, but in the world of gangs, truth and rumor rarely matter. What mattered was his legacy, a time when a single call from Estrada courts could determine whether someone lived or died. Mariano Chewy Martinez was not the one pulling the trigger. He was not the loudest or the most aggressive. His danger came from something else. He managed violence like a business tool and caused deaths from far beyond the street where they happened. When a person can kill with a sentence spoken through a radio, distance is meaningless. And inside the Mexican Mafia, that was real power.